Welcome to Jazz Zone Together, our new online jazz community where we will provide jazz education and classroom resources, interviews with jazz educators, artists, and celebrities, along with valuable tips and repertoire suggestions. Today, we're pleased to welcome one of the most highly recognized folks in the jazz world, Jamey Aebersold, a true pioneer in jazz education known throughout the world. Now I'll turn the mic over to Dick Dunscomb to conduct the interview with Jamey. Dick, please take it away.
Thank you, Bob. Hey, Jamey, it's so good to be with you today. It's so important that we have you on this series. Your stature is tops among all.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Great. So we usually begin by talking about your early years. How did you get involved in music, and take us through your beginning stages as a young boy in high school and college, and let us get a little bit of background.
Okay, well, I think when I was about 4 years old, my older brother, who was 4 years older than me, he somehow got to take piano lessons and I wanted to take, so I was upset for a whole year. And then I think when I was about 5, they allowed me to take piano lessons. Well, and I enjoyed it at first. My mom made me practice an hour a day. But as you know, it got to be 8, 9, 10 years old. My mom and I were fighting about that 1 hour of practice because I wanted to be out playing baseball or basketball or whatever. So my piano teacher took care of that when I was about 10 years old. I went in for a lesson and I started to play. She had 2 pianos there. And I started playing. She says, Jamey, stop. And I stopped, and she opened her desk up, and I knew something was up because this was unusual after 4 or 5 years. And she reached in and got the $2 out and stood up, shut the desk, and said, here, Jamey, you go on home. You'll never be a musician. You don't want to practice. So I went home on my bike, relieved, of course, but also thinking, when I get home, I'm going to catch it, for not doing what she wanted me to do. But nobody said a word. So I made the natural switch to tenor banjo because my dad played the banjo. And I took lessons on the bus by myself at probably age 10 or 11 from New Albany over to Louisville downtown and back, which of course, carrying a big banjo, there's no way anybody would let any kid do that today. But I did that for a couple of years. And along the way, my older brother was playing the alto saxophone. And when I got to be 12 years old, he quit the band in high school. And I took over the alto. And I distinctly remember going up to Silver Street Elementary, which is about 2 blocks from my house, for the first day of band. And I got there, and of course, I knew how to read music because I'd been playing piano and playing banjo. And I'd kind of been teaching myself on the alto. So I got up there, and these kids were just starting. So I was real disappointed because I thought we were going to dive in and be playing songs and whatever. But they were just learning to read notes. So that was a disappointment. So I stuck with the alto, and I'm still playing it. Then when I got up to high school, actually at that time in the 6th grade, I really thought they were going to be talking to me about music or whatever I thought music was. So when I found out that those kids in 6th grade, they're just getting started, didn't know anything about music, but I did know a little bit. I said, well, it must be next year when I go downtown to junior high school, 7 and 8. Of course, I got down there and the band was much bigger, 75, 80 kids, but no jazz or anything. And I couldn't figure it out why we were still playing these marches and stuff. So I said, well, it must be when we get to high school. Well, I got to high school and playing the saxophone, and they were marching, and I didn't care anything about marching. So my second year of high school, sophomore. I didn't even sign up for a band. I was so disappointed. And I think possibly by that time we'd started a little band of our own, trumpet, tenor, alto, trombone, piano, bass, and drums. And we rehearsed on my dad's florist. We called ourselves the Nighthawks. So then when I came back in junior year, I was in the band, but I was kind of a thorn in the band director's side. The band director's name was Fielder Myers, and he played the violin. And when he was out playing dances around the country and stuff, and he didn't think that life was something for any of his students. So I remember in the fall of either my junior or senior year, he was giving the band a lecture. Anybody wants to be a band director, I'll help you get a scholarship to Eastern Illinois or Eastern or Richmond, Kentucky, or over here. But that didn't interest me. And he looked over at me and he said, anybody wants to be a professional musician, that's a terrible life. You don't want to do that. And he went on and on. And I have a couple of classmates who can, to this day, kind of recite what he was basically saying to me. So when I got through that, I said, well, and by that time I'd been reading magazines, Downbeat and whatever magazine was out there at the time. And I knew that New York was the place to go. So in my senior year, I signed up for Manhattan School of Music. I wrote a letter and I waited weeks, maybe several months. And I finally got a letter back and it said, Dear Mr. Aebersold, we do not offer the saxophone. And I went, oh my gosh, I can't go to New York. But a friend of my brother's who was in the kitchen one day, who played trumpet, and he was at Indiana University for an education degree. He made the comment, they're jamming in East Hall at Indiana University all the time. That was his perception, that there were people over there playing jazz. And of course, at that time, there were people like maybe Freddie Hubbard and Wes Montgomery would come down on Wednesday jam sessions. So there was jazz going on. So I went to IU. And when I got to IU, I can still remember the fall day, like early September, when I went into the woodwind faculty office, got my saxophone out and asked me to play a little bit. And then they said, now what degree are you going to be on? I said, well, saxophone. And I still remember one of the woodwind faculty say, well, we don't offer the saxophone. And I was just stunned. It was like, well, stop. We've already paid our tuition, my mom, and I'm here and I'm over at the dormitory. You've got to give me sax lesson. He said, well, we can put you on a woodwind degree. I said, well, what is that? He said, well, you'll take clarinet, flute, oboe, and bassoon. And I don't know what I said. I was probably so flabbergasted. I just said, my gosh, I'm trapped. So I did that degree. But in the second year, Roger Pemberton, who was a very famous arranger and player from Evansville, Indiana, and played with the Merv Griffin Show and Woody Herman and different people. The second year, he came for his graduate degree and they let me take lessons from him. That was good. And we ended up several years later from my senior recital and my graduate recital playing jazz as half the program, which broke the ice at Indiana University for jazz. Of course, when I got out of college, I never used the oboe or the flute or the clarinet really, or the bassoon. I've still got a scar up here in my eyebrow from the bassoon. Quickly taken the bocal off one day and it's hit me up here instead of my eye. So that was my education, so to speak. Along the way, I will say though that Maud Thomas, that was my piano teacher's name. She wasn't married. And as a young kid, she had this back room to the side of the house that had all these African ballads in it. My dad was a florist and I worked in the florist. And she thought I'd like to see the African ballads. So every couple of months, she'd ask me to come back. And my little brain would be saying, this is the day she kidnaps me. I'll never get out of this house. She's talking about African ballads, but I know she's going to kidnap me. Oh, that was a kid. So that was kind of my early history.
Well, you survived both the bassoon and the lady. That's good.
I sure did. Incidentally, my dad played the banjo. This is really what got me into music. He played in a group that was called the Indiana Banjoleers.
Wow.
He's on the right hand side there.
Mm-hmm.
And they played on our Louisville radio station once a week. They had a program. And this is something special. I don't think you'll find one of these in America. My dad was messing with the piano when he was young, and he got this certificate at a music school here in New Albany.
Huh.
I don't know if you can read that or not, but it was a
Very good.
Christian School of Popular Music. This is to certify that Stanley J. Aebersold has successfully completed the advanced course in rag jazz piano. How about that? Isn't that
Well,
something?
something from those days, huh?
Yeah. So anyhow, he played music and my mom played the piano and sang. That's how I got into music. And my other two brothers, the one older and younger, they all played too, but none of them really continued on with it.
Well, Jamey, let's skip ahead a little bit here.
All right.
I know in the late 60s, you began creating Playalong Record, and they were originally in the LP form. But throughout that decade, it became the go-to for students and performers of all levels of jazz. Tell us a little bit about what led you to create this series and how it has impacted jazz around the world.
Well, it's had a tremendous impact. There's not a second that goes by of any day that someone around the world isn't practicing with one of my play-along cassettes, LPs, CDs, bootleg stuff, you name it, streaming off the internet and so forth. It's extremely popular because people like to play with other people. And it gets old just practicing and playing songs by yourself. So in about 1965, I joined Ken Morris and his stage band camps in the summertime. And having that much dealing with students who professed to want to play jazz, I learned what they needed to know at his camps and stuff. And I would come home and teach it to my students too. And then after a while, I realized I had already, when in high school, made a real tape of me playing my mom's B3 organ, walking bass lines in the left hand, playing chords in the right hand, which I think I have the original tape right down here on the floor. And I've had a fella up by Cincinnati transfer it to CD. I haven't had the nerve to play the CD yet, but I'm curious to hear it. I took that tape recorder and that real tape to Indiana University for 4 years. So I would lug it from my locker up to the room and practice with it over and over. So that was my original play along track. But when we got to 67, you remember Chuck Suber?
I sure do.
Yeah. Well, he was at the camp down in Indiana. And I mentioned to him that I thought about making a piano, bass, and drums play along with some tracks. And if I did it, would he like to sell it through his national, whatever it was called? I'm looking at it right here. I can't see. Today's Music, he called it. Today's Music. Yeah, Libertyville, Illinois. He said, well, if you make an LP, I'll buy 100 copies. So I said, okay. So in 1967, then a couple years later, I actually put it out. It's interesting too, Dick, that I think I made the record first. And then it dawned on me that people bought the record and there's nobody soloing, they'll feel like they got cheated. So I better put a little booklet with it. That took me forever. Here's the first book.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thin paper, no hardcover, and the chord progressions were way back in the back of the book, and they were just in concert key. I figured if you were going to be a jazzer, you had to learn how to transpose right off the bat. No scales written in like there is today. If it calls for an F minor scale, you look in the back part of the other part of the book, you learn the scale, you memorize it. You don't need to go back to that page again. You got it memorized. But that all changed over time. And of course, now we've got the new versions, which have not only the scales written in, but the dark notes indicate the chord tones, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. So education has made a big step in allowing the student to actually see the scales and the chords that are going on that background track. So that was very innovative there to put I started off with just concert key, then I put transpose, and then I wrote the scales in, and then I darkened the chord tones in. So that was my progression over probably 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And that got me started. And I really thought there'd only be one play along. There wouldn't be need for another one. But then we came out with number 2, which was the blues, number 3, which was the 2-5-1. Then number 4 was going to be the last one. Dan Hurley and I wrote some advanced songs, and they were hard. I figured that's it. But then people were buying them, and they were saying volume 4s, they were buying 1, 2, 3. And when they got to 4, they couldn't play up. Jamey, that's too hard. So then we put out volume 5 with easy tunes, thinking this is it, you know. And then volume 6 came along with Charlie Parker. It was like, oh, here we go. Volume 7 was Miles Davis. Volume 8 was Sonny Rollins. Volume 9 was Woody Shaw, who was really hot, but that wasn't beginning music. Volume 10 was David Baker, then Herbie Hancock, then Duke Ellington, then Cannonball Adderley, then Benny Golson, and then Lee Konitz. I went to New York and Lee was in the studio. Ron Carter, Ben Riley, I think, and Kenny Barron. But when we got through with that one, he was doing contrafacts, new melodies against old harmonies, Body and Soul, I Remember April, etc. But then his wife somehow entered the conversation and she killed the contract. So I can remember telling her on the phone, well, Lee wrote these contrafacts, so I'm going to have to write some contrafacts if you're not going to play ball with me. And I did. That's volume 15. So excellent record, but not very many people buy it. They don't know that it was Lee Konitz's melodies. Of course, I never did get to publish them. And then finally, X amount of years later, we ended up with volume 133, which is my last one. And this was made some time ago. We haven't put out a new volume in a long time. So that's kind of the history of the play-alongs. I did not intend to have a series of play-alongs, not by any means.
Well, I can speak for many, many jazz educators and students to say, thank you, Jamey. Without it, I'm not sure how a lot of people would have ever even entered into trying to improvise. And you set the goal posts for many of us to, follow along that. I also remember, I think at the Indiana University, the Stan Kenton camp, you were there, and I think that's the first time I ever met you. And through the decades, you've built and operated many jazz camps and workshops, which have impacted the lives of literally thousands of students, musicians, and pros. Talk to us about the workshops and share with us some of the faculty who have participated in this process as well.
Okay. Well, like I told you earlier, in 1965, Ken Morris had asked me to join the National Stage Band Camps, which was a big band camp. And I loved it. I loved being around all those people, John Laporta and Herb Pomeroy and Ray Santisi, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I rehearsed they might have had 3 or 4 or 5 big bands. So I would rehearse in the morning 2 sax sectionals and 2 in the afternoon. Along the way, I realized that some of the students were much more advanced than others, and they really needed this individual combo experience. So I asked the powers to be, I don't know if it was Ken Morris or John Laporta or somebody, would you mind right after supper at 6:30, from 6:30 to 7:30 before the concert, could I have a combo upstairs and choose some people? Oh, sure, Jamey, do that. And we did. And then another thing I noticed, the students hadn't listened to a lot of the important records. So I would say, well, can I have on Tuesday, can I have a listening session from 6:30 to 7:30? And we'll put a notice up when anybody wants to come, they can. So I did that. Well, that gradually morphed into about 5 or 6 years later when I asked Ken Morris, Ken, have you ever thought about, I'm sure you haven't, but I have, how about having a combo camp where on Friday, every student gets to take a solo, not just a couple of kids in the big band. Drummers, bass players, tuba players, fourth trombone, baritone sax, flute, harp, you name it. Whatever instrument they bring to this combo camp, we'll get them ready. And on Friday, they're going to be featured for a minute while they take their solo. And we started that actually with out in Provo, Utah, Brigham Young University. The fellow out there, the trumpeter, whose name I can't think of right now, he asked me to come out by myself for 3 weeks. And I did. Every day I did some clinics at the school there. And then the next year I brought out people like Jerry Coker. I don't think David Baker went, Dan Hurley, Rufus Reed, probably Ed Soph, et cetera. And we had a combo camp. So that was probably the first combo camp in the nation. And we did that for several years. And then Ken Morris started his combo camps. And one year we had 7 weeks of combo camps. I think 3 or 4 in the United States, 1 in Canada, and 3 in Europe, Germany, Denmark, and Scotland, something like that. That was back in the late 70s and 80s. And I think the reason they became so popular was we gave them individual attention. All these people that thought they couldn't improvise and they were going to spend the rest of their life just reading notes on the page as part of a big band or a combo. We said, no, you come with us, come to our camp. We teach you some theory. We'll teach you how to practice, and we're going to put you into a combo, and we're going to see how creative you can be for a week's long time, and then go practice it for the rest of the year. So that's how we got started. The last 2 years, we haven't had a camp because of the virus. But we started in about 72. I think last year would have been the 53rd year, or maybe the year before. I can't remember. We're up in the early 50s. I hope to do them again next year, 2022. I hope to do them at the University of Louisville like we've been doing.
Great. I'm sure that the clientele will be there, and happily so. Jamey, I have to say something. You have been a real philanthropist throughout the years. I remember working in Poland for a period of time, and the people over there, of course, love jazz, but they had no materials at all. And I contacted you, and you were kind enough to send some materials over there. And I know that you've done this throughout the world. Talk a little bit about that outreach that you've done, and what's come back to you from that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've got several outreaches. In 1967, I distinctly remember getting a letter from a prisoner at a prison down in Tennessee. And he didn't have any money, and he had read somewhere about my volume 1 book and LP, and he wanted to know if I would send him one. Well, my first thought back then was, well, I wonder what this guy's done to deserve being in prison. Of course, today we know he didn't have to do much to be arrested and go to prison, especially if he was a black fellow. So I reluctantly sent him a book and record. And then that gradually morphed over the years into what I call my prison ministry. So I've made contact with dozens and dozens and dozens of students, not students, well, they're music students, but they're trapped in the prison system, and they need a trumpet, or they need a saxophone, or they need electric bass, or maybe they need a cassette recorder back there, or maybe they allow CD players, they need a CD player, or they need headphones. And if they have a band going, maybe they need a PA system, or they need drums or whatever. So I've sort of gotten into supplying various prisoners around the country with the instruments that they need. And some have gotten out and are still in correspondence with me now. In Seattle, for instance, New York, I'm trying to think, New York, Indiana, Alabama, Georgia. I usually get about 1 or 2 letters a month from a prisoner requesting my jazz handbook, which is, I don't have a copy of it here, but it's free for any of your listeners. If you just email me at jamey@jazzbooks.com, and I'll send you a copy of this jazz book. But it's, for a lot of people, it's their education. So I've got the prison ministry going, and then in the past, I've sent a lot of stuff. I sent a whole skid of stuff to the Ukraine years ago. I've got pictures of us sitting on top, 30, 40, 50 boxes of LPs and so forth, material for their library system. I hope it got there, and I hope it got distributed. I don't know, But I've enjoyed helping people. I mean, if I got the wherewithal to do it, and people ask and they can't afford it, how can I not send it to them?
That's beautiful. And that is really who Jamey Aebersold is, I'll tell you. You mentioned jazzbooks.com.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that and share with us your vision for its future.
Well, like I said, I started off with 1 volume, and Chuck Suber was selling it. I wasn't selling it. But then we gradually worked up to where I put my little ads in Downbeat magazine, and I would send them out myself in a package, in a little cardboard folder, not thinking we were going to do volume 2. But when I put volume 2, and then at that point, I was putting a little ad in Downbeat in the classified. I put volume 1, and then I put new volume 2. Guess what? I sold more of volume 1. Mm-hmm. And when volume 3 came out, I sold more of volume 1 and volume 2, in addition to 3. But it was interesting. I was just getting started in marketing or whatever you want to call it, you know. I was surprised that that's kind of the way it worked, you know. So, and then Jerry Coker at some point, who was doing this stage band camps with me, he asked if I would sell his patterns for jazz book that Studio PR had published, Jim Houston. I said, well, I don't know. I haven't done that before. So I put an ad on the, what is it, revised edition. I put an ad for that and a couple of combo arrangements that I had written that Jim Houston was selling. So we're just kind of getting started here. And that's it. Jerry's book. I had a logo at that point, J.A., you know, and then that led to volume 2, volume 3. I think it was Dan Hurley that said, why don't we do the 2-5-1 progression? Let me grab one here. Here's good old volume 3.
Yeah.
And I can remember telling Dan, nobody's going to know what that is. And I think he said something like, well, if we do it, they'll know. So I said, okay, we'll do it. Now we've got it. And we've got 2 CDs with it. We've got transposed parts. We've got patterns. If you want to practice your 2-5-1s, you have to get this. You don't need to bother other people. You know what I mean? Go ask them questions. All the answers are in that book right there. And then we gradually moved into more. Once we got up into Sonny Rollins and Herbie Hancock and Duke Ellington, we were on our way. Music stores were wanting to buy our stuff. And of course, I hadn't really sold to music stores. So I had to get a ledger book and start writing everything down by hand and so forth. And we kept copious notes through those years. And it got bigger and bigger. And after about 10 years, I hired somebody to help me. And he's still with me after about 42 years. Yeah, he's about 62. And he started when he was about 18 or so. Matt E. And he knows the business inside out. But that's how we got started. And then other people wanted it. And then people from other countries wanted to buy from us. So we started shipping overseas and so forth. It had a big, then we went to Australia. I went to Australia in 78 for 3 weeks by myself, doing clinics all over the place. Next year, we brought over about 12 people and did jazz camps in Melbourne and Sydney and Wellington, New Zealand. So all of a sudden, we're infiltrating that part of the world, you know. I've been to China 3 times. We've been to Germany 3 or 4 times. I've been to London probably 20 times with jazz camps and so forth. So it's interesting how this concept that started way back there with Ken Morris and big band camps morphed into 6:30 to 7:30 sessions after supper at the big band camps, then into a camp in Provo, Utah. Then Ken Morris grabbed hold of it. Next thing you know, we're over at Eastern Illinois. Then we're up at DeKalb. Then we're at Milliken. Then we're at Champaign. Then we're at Normal. Then we're at IU. Then we're at University of Louisville. Then we're at Elmhurst, Illinois. Then we go to California. Then we go to Colorado. We've been all around. So the jazz books has been everywhere because at all those camps, I would box up stuff and take and sell at a discount price. Records like this. At all the combo camps, all of us faculty quickly realized that the students were not aware of these famous records. Your guitar players, they had to buy this record. So I started buying records from record companies and selling them at a discount price at the camps. And I would play records during the 10 o'clock jazz musicianship class. And I would use the overhead projector, which I still do, with transcribed solos. Show them how the scales and cards are part of these famous people's solos. And that's why they need to practice their scales and cards. And next thing you know, we had generation after generation that had grown up listening to this music, you know, and trying to emulate it in their own way. And jazz books was the educational outlet that sold this stuff to music dealers and to individuals. And we're still doing it today. And our latest thing, which is we've had now for about a year and a half, we've got probably 2,000 tracks. So you can stream for $5 a month. You can sign up. Or just go to jazzbooks.com and it says streaming. And you can sign up for $5 a month and have access on your phone or your iPad or your computer to 2,000 songs. And each of the tracks, say you want to play Summertime. It's got, you can pick what am I trying to say? You can have piano and drums. If you're a bass player, you can play along with piano and drums. If you're a piano player, you can pick the track that has bass and drums, and you play the piano. And if you're a horn player, you can pick the trio, piano, bass, drums, track, and play along with it. So that's where we're at right now. And we're at the point of trying to put the chord progressions up with the tracks on the streaming. So once we do that, we think we will have tied the knot to make everything accessible.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure that, I don't know that a lot of people know about the ABCs of jazz education, but I want to tell you, the A is Jamey Aebersold, the B is David Baker, and the C is Jerry Coker. Yeah. So you've committed your whole life and career to jazz education. Talk to us a little bit about what you believe to be the status of jazz education in the United States and around the world.
Well, I was thinking over that question last night. Let me just look at my comments here to see if I still agree with what I wrote. Well, okay. I think, here's what I think. I think there's not enough band directors over the last 10, 15 years that grew up with the Aebersold Playalong records and the David Baker books and the Jerry Coker books and the Dan Hurley books. The idea that, here's the way I see it. Music originates in the mind. So we're humming it and we're thinking it, okay? And we're in the Western civilization. We're not in India or Iraq or Afghanistan playing scales that are different than ours. We're using major scales, minor scales, dominant seventh scales, half diminished scales, et cetera, and the arpeggios and the chords, okay? And we're playing melody and we're trying to outline the harmony. So in our mind, when we hum and think melodies, we're using bits and pieces of scales and chords. I feel like that has been overlooked in jazz education. I think in a way, we're back to the spot where the band director, for instance, doesn't know much about jazz or improvisation at all, but yet he's playing an arrangement and the tenor player here needs to take a solo, or the trumpet player, but he doesn't give him any guidance. You follow me with this? So they kind of play by ear, all right? And they don't really ever lock into playing the harmony that the piano, the bass, the guitar player are supposed to be playing over here. So I think the idea of the Playalong record way back there, my first track on the record, it hasn't changed in 53 years. It's concert key. It's F minor, Dorian minor scale for 8 bars. And then it goes down to E flat, Dorian minor for 8 bars. And then it goes to D minor for 8 bars. So it's a 24 bar sequence and it's played 4 times. My thought has always been, if you can give the student the scale, which we do, and notate the chord tones, and have them practice that scale and that arpeggio over, and then the next one and the next one. That's not too big of an assignment. And then you put the record on or the CD and you start to play with that. If you can bring the music out of your mind onto your instrument spontaneously, simple melodies, you've got to start. But if you just put the record on and have them play by ear, their ear is not developed enough to be able to even know what that first scale is. So that's where the eyes come in. And you memorize those 3 scales in that order, and you shut the book and you start playing from memory. But what you're pulling from here is based on scales and chords. That's my whole thing. And I don't think that's been pushed enough. I know it hasn't, because when I listen to people who've been playing in jazz bands for a couple of years, they're not playing the harmony. They're not playing the tune. And I attribute that to the band director that doesn't have access to the knowledge in his head and his ears aren't tuned. And we can take that back to the colleges that have graduated people, but their ears are still not real good. To give you an example, yesterday I gave 2 lessons to graduate students from the University of Louisville, just across the river. Both of them are from Brazil. Piano player, and he's a classical clarinet player, 53 years old, okay? But he brought his soprano sax. So we had about a 3-hour lesson. Their theory and their ear training is pretty good. I'd say it's mediocre, okay? But for their age, the piano player is 30 years old. So we're talking about 2 adults came over here who were having trouble identifying chords, major, minor, dominant seventh, half diminished, intervals, And when the sax player started to play, he was sort of playing right notes, but it was gibberish. It didn't make any sense. It wasn't coming from here. And the same thing with the piano player. We were playing on F blues, and it was just, I actually told him, I said, you know, the way you're playing right here on the right hand, your solo, is what I've tried to avoid playing my entire life. I said, now that's an insult, but I'm telling you that because what you played is not coming from your mind. It's just your fingers moving. So I said, scoot over on the piano. I'm going to walk a bass line. We're playing on F blues, and I'll play 2 notes in the left hand. Now you solo with just the right hand. Now you don't have to think about the left hand or the chords. You just solo. He was transformed in about 3 or 4 minutes. He started playing, and it was swinging. And when we got done, I asked the older guy, I said, what do you think? He said, in the beginning, boy, it really sounded good. Yeah, that sounded good. But later on, it sounded not quite as good as what he was trying to say. I totally agree with you. So I, as your teacher yesterday, I said, I know you have it inside you because you just played it. And if we'd recorded it, you could have heard it back. But what you played when you first came in here was not music. It wasn't you. And I certainly don't want to hear it again, you know. So I think this lack of education for scales and chords and listening and transcribing solos and developing your ear to the point where you can hear what's going on and you don't have to ask other people what that scale is. You can pick up your instrument, find the root. You can tell what the third is, what the seventh is. Next thing you know, you've got the scale. Next thing is you improvise. The object, of course, is not to spend the rest of your life practicing scales and chords. The object is to play some music and improvise. That's the creative part about it. Use your imagination. Yes, I still play.
Beautiful, beautiful, man. You still got it.
Well, I try to practice 20, 30 minutes at night. I watch the NBA ball games on my computer down here. My wife goes to bed early, you know, so I'm practicing. We've got our first job really in a year, Friday night from 6 to 8 at the New Albany Library. They have these exhibits, and they're going to have quilts up, and it's opening night, all these quilts. And we're up on the balcony playing a song from my father.
Okay.
And you know what I mean? Tenderly, body
Yeah,
and soul, Perdido, satin down. Yeah, they love it. So I'm getting ready to make a flyer, send out to my big list. Friday night, if you're not doing anything, come and rob me. It's free. They have some food, and you can hear jazz for the first time in a year.
Well, that's a lesson for all of us. I'm sure that the many band directors that view this interview will come away much smarter and much more in tune with the language of jazz and how to go about doing it. You've heard it from the master, Jamey Aebersold. You have been my icon throughout the years and continue to be every day. I want to thank you for doing this interview and know how much we love you and appreciate all you have done.
Well, thanks, Dick. I enjoyed being here.
Thank you, Jamey, for all of
All
the input and the valuable information you shared. I know our viewers will appreciate all of it. To our viewers, thank you for watching and for being a part of our Jazz Zone Together community. We hope you enjoyed the interview and all of the information that Jamey shared and found it of real value.